How's it going, everybody? My name is Christopher, this is my dad Leighton, and this is the Oosthuisen Show. And today we have a great show covering the last of our frequently asked questions series, part 3, where we're going to be talking about some of the questions that we get here at the school and just in general about dogs. But before we get to that, we got a few words from our sponsors.
So that's an interesting thing. The other day, John was talking to me, and he mentioned that. Sorry, had the sound going here.
And just to take note of that, I not even 30 seconds ago told him, make sure you don't have your sound on, because he does that every week where he brings up the feed, and then every week it plays in the background. And so I just told him, like, make sure you don't have your sound on. He's like, got it. And then it plays right there.
Are you hating on me this fast?
Yeah. Well, this is live on Facebook and so forth. So you were saying questions.
So obviously, one of the things that we're talking about is what we should be leading into the show. And obviously, Christopher wants us to talk about sponsors. And John Lynn brought up a great idea. He said we should get straight to the content matter. So I want to know from you guys, obviously, you all know Partners Dog Training is our main sponsor. But, how do you want us to run this format? Would you prefer that we just kind of went straight into the subject matter, or kind of just did some housekeeping and so forth beforehand? Yep. And while you go and talk about Partners Dogs, I'm going to share on my side.
Yep. So Partners Dog Training School is one of the biggest dog training schools in the country. We've trained about 40,000 dogs now, specializing in behavioral training. We do boarding, private lessons, group classes, daycare, everything along those lines. And if you can't come visit us here in Arizona, check out HeyLudwig on Facebook Messenger. Basically, you tell it about your dog and it uses those behavioral traits to create personalized curriculums to help you solve problems. And that's basically the main housekeeping stuff. We might actually have a few potential sponsors coming down the line, but stay tuned for that. And that brings us to our show today, which
we should also talk about the fact that we are fully booked now.
Yeah. So in our boarding facility right now, we're completely booked right now until we're not completely booked, but now we're at the point where it's like we have to start bringing in minimums, unfortunately. So we have about a 7-day minimum right now, at least until July 4th weekend. We don't like doing that. We're trying to find ways to create more space so that we can, be able to accommodate people and their dogs and not have to turn anyone away and not have to charge more, unnecessarily. But yeah, so that's it's exciting.
It's a nice problem to have.
It's a nice problem to have.
We obviously love being busy, and it obviously shows we're doing something right, because we don't often book this far out ahead, but we really appreciate the support, and so thanks to all of you guys and so forth. So something else we need to talk about is, are we going to do a show next week? Because that's our last week that we hear.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to, but then I realized we're on episode 17 right now, and I have a really bad thing about ending on like odd numbers, so I feel like we have to. Yeah, all right. It just feels weird.
So we'll do one more show next week, and then we're going to take a break for a couple of weeks. We'll be actually out of the country. We're going to be competing in the Czech Republic, and so it's going to be kind of difficult. We did look into it, but it's too difficult for us to do it from there. It actually would mean we'd have to do it like in the morning for the day before, and it's just way too complicated,
basically. But season 2 will be coming back probably mid-July.
Right. Okay. So today we're going to talk about some of the more regular problems that people have, and the one I'm going to jump into right now, actually, and I'll mention it was for Carissa. Carissa is a long-time former employee of ours, worked for us many years ago, and she actually brought her dog in for training. And today, when she picked the dog up, she came and did a follow-up lesson, and I was chatting with her, and I was talking about the need for repetition and for practice, and I thought that would be a great thing to bring up tonight, because this is something that everybody comes across. So how do you transition your training at the school or your training when you're in class to a training situation at home? And we talked about this before in different contexts, but basically you're going to go back to your shaping, your modeling, your foundation. And the example I always use is like a kid, right? If you send a kid off to class or to school, the teacher's going to teach them how to sit in their chair, and then they're going to have to sit in this, like on a carpet. They have little spots. I remember one teacher, I think it was your school or Alessandra's school, I can't remember. Anyway, but they have little demarcated areas where each of the kids in class sits, and then that way it teaches them their foundation. Now in dog training we do exactly the same thing. We have something called a reset, which is basically you just step back, dog comes back to the heel position, you put your dog in a sit, or you take
And those are also what we call default behaviors, right?
Default behaviors are what your dog defaults to if you basically just call your dog, they come to you and they come to the heel position.
And going back to the kid example, I do a lot of work in schools, and there's all these cute tricks that they have right now. So whenever they're either in a line walking from one location to the other, in order for the kids to stay focused, they basically say like, hold a bubble in your mouth, and then all the kids go like that, which is kind of cute, but it's a really good default behavior, because then they know whenever we're going from one place to the other and we're going to stand in line, we got to hold a bubble in our mouth so that we don't talk and we don't communicate with each other, and potentially get distracted and get out of line. So the same thing happens with your dog. Whenever you are faced with a situation that might increase their state of arousal, might become a distraction, might be whatever is down the line, then they know they're going to go into that obedience routine, which is what you have established as their default behavior. And that can be a combination of sits, heels downs, resets, left about turns, anything that can really throw a balance and control into the situation to help balance that.
And I got one more tip for you guys as well. I used to refer this as a one-step sit, right? But there's different variations of it. So basically what you do is you start your dog off in the heel position, you take one step forward, step off with your left foot. Remember, the left foot, the foot nearest the dog, cues the dog. So you step off with the left foot, take one step, and then slide your right foot in alongside the left, and you put your dog back in a sit. So basically it's heel, sit, heel, sit. And then what you want to do, the second part of that, is you want to make sure that your dog engages you, which means, fancy way of saying, looks up at you. The best way to teach that is to use a reward, or to obviously use some food, use a treat, something like that. As the dog comes in and sits,
make goofy sounds.
Right. Just get their attention on you. And remember, if you're doing this exercise and the dog is not paying attention to you, meaning they're looking around, they're looking at other distractions, then obviously the exercise is going to fall apart. So again, we're going to take one step forward, tell the dog sit, get the dog to watch us, and then pay them with a treat. Once they've done that, you take another step forward and you do the whole exercise again. Once you've got that down, you can go to the more advanced version where you can actually do a heel down position. So instead of going to a sit, you put your dog in a down, but the trick here is to get the dog to lay down while they're still watching you at the same time. That's actually pretty difficult to do. So once when you learn how to master that, you'll realize it's actually hugely beneficial. A lot of times, if I have a dog that's easily distracted, or a dog that wants to, maybe key up on somebody else or another dog or something like that, I'll use that exercise and put the dog in a heel down, take a step forward, heel, one step down again, one step down again, etc. That really focuses them on the behavior.
So you mentioned they must step off with their left foot. Why their left foot?
So just something that we've always learned and that I was taught many years ago is that my dog is always on my left side.
Is there a reason for that?
We don't know the exact reason. It's actually really interesting, and maybe somebody out there can tell me. But the belief is that because in the old days dogs would walk on the left and we'd walk our horses on the right, so you'd have the horse holding you'd be holding your reins or the bridle of the horse in your right hand, your dog would be walking on the left side. There's a couple of different variations of that, and in actual fact, in some countries they do teach a dog to walk on the other side, the right side. Is there any
type of situations like where someone would teach their dog to walk on the right side?
For the most part, when we do see people walking the dogs on the right side, meaning the opposite side, not the correct side, right side, but the right-hand side, it's just because that's what they've got used to. There's no real reason for that. There are some specific cases where there is a justified reason. Somebody who's handicapped, for example, somebody who's maybe had some kind of a medical condition, a stroke or something like that, and they've lost the use of one of their arms, and they feel more comfortable putting the dog on the other side. And
what about, isn't there something in sport dog training where they do right
side?
Yeah,
so in sport dog, you're talking about when we step off with our right foot in sport dog?
Yeah, well, I know why. Yeah, so talk about that. Why do you step off?
So this
is
more complex, and probably I shouldn't be discussing here in a basic thing, but with our sport dog training, and when we train, or specifically when I train dogs for sport dogs, I generally want my dog on the left-hand side. But when I step off, if I step off with my left foot, then it looks like the dog is slightly lagging behind, because as I take that step, the dog is behind by half a step. Even my Mal is really quick and catches up real fast. So what we do is we step off with the right foot, and then it kind of gives the appearance that the dog is at the heel position. But that's only something if you're really competing with your dog in AKC or in French Ring or Mondior or something like that, that it makes a difference.
Yeah, so that was a good answer.
And I see Mary wrote here, because back in the day your horse was on the right, your dog was on the left. Yeah, Mary, I agree. I don't know whether you heard that from us, but that's That's the thing. And let's talk about what Michael came up here. He says, can we talk about the importance of distraction training? Well, I can't even put into words how important this is. So once you've got your foundation established, it's critical that you train your dog to work under distraction. Now, that doesn't mean, introducing a distraction that's so crazy that your dog falls off the cliff. What you're looking for is a mild distraction, so you learn how to monitor, how to control that dog's energy during that distraction, right? And the way to do that is to use a little pressure on the dog and to use like a visual cue with, I shouldn't say a cue, more of a like a visual connection, like look at me, watch me, that type of thing. Introduce the distraction. We had a situation today where somebody showed up and we were outside doing landscaping and building the new fencing that's going into our daycare area. It's the final phase of the daycare. And they showed up with the dog, and the dog was barking at us because I was wearing a big hat and glasses, etc. And I said to him, okay, let's get the dog under control. This is a school after all. And we worked with him a little bit, did some heel work, did a reset with the dog a couple of times, and the dog started paying attention. So that was a great example of distraction training and teaching a dog to work under distraction.
And I also I'm reading a book right now about like tolerances and more pertaining to the medical side, but it actually applies really, really well for behavioral training as well. So when you're first trying to build up a dog's tolerance basically of distractions, you don't want to completely throw them in the deep end, because inevitably they'll break that distraction. You're basically setting them up to fail. So you really want to set them up for success and stage a more less impactful distraction and really build their obedience and
one step at a time.
That. Yep, exactly.
If you ever get into sport dog training, now we do dock, we jump our dogs off the dock occasionally. That's probably the most critical way to test your dog's level of distraction. Crush, for example, my Dutch Shepherd, when he's on the dock, he is just unbelievably high drive, and it's very difficult to control that. And so I have little steps that I'll put him through. I'll make him go to the end of the dock, and I'll make him wait for a few seconds. I'll walk away, then I'll come back, I'll test him, walk away, come back, keeping him in that stay position all the time. So what you want to do is you don't want your dog to learn to anticipate what you're going to do next. So you literally must keep changing up your game so that your dog doesn't learn what the next step is. The mic okay?
Yeah. Just kind of fell off the hook there. So one kind of interesting question that we actually had today, since we are doing landscaping and so forth outside, is because we're working a lot with the dirt and so forth, is there a risk for potentially the dogs that are in daycare or in that area to get valley fever?
Valley fever is everywhere. In the old days, we used to talk about if there was dust around, your dog could contract valley fever because there's spores inside the dust that could make your dog sick. But I know of lots of dogs that aren't anywhere near dust and they still get valley fever. Also, if you're one of these storms, what's that storm called that we get here in Phoenix?
Monsoons.
Yeah, in the monsoon.
Haboob?
The Haboob?
Yeah.
Yep. When that Haboob rolls through here and we get those huge dust storms, well, there's nothing that beats that. I mean, the whole place literally goes to darkness almost from that. Given the choice, what we do is, like when we're working today, we're wetting down everything the whole time. We have a hose running nonstop. We put a person on the hose to make sure we keep the dust down. And then we do try and keep the dogs away from that area while we're working. So we won't have dogs in the area where we're actually doing site works and so forth. But as I said, the fact is that there's dogs that live indoors and that aren't even exposed to outdoors, that aren't out in the wind and the dust and everything, and they get valley fever. Unfortunately, valley fever is just everywhere. While we're talking about valley fever, we should probably talk about another issue that's going on right now, and this is really for the Phoenix area, but it does apply to people, to all of you guys if you're in other states or in other areas. So there's an outbreak of parvo, I should say. There's an outbreak of distemper going around. There's always parvo around. But just so that you understand, distemper is a very, very serious disease, and it's highly contagious. So, we know that the animal control has stopped allowing people bringing their pets to do intros to a dog they might be adopting. There's also a 30-day waiting period for dogs that come out of there, and that's something that we've done. We've always done that just for safety, where if a dog has come out of a rescue or a animal control type scenario or area, that the dog has to be in your home for at least 30 days before you can bring it to our school. Mm-hmm. We're very, very strict about that. I was told by one of our instructors, Jen, the other day, that somebody showed up at snake avoidance training with I think it was a puppy, and can't bring puppies to the school. Remember, they've got to be fully vaccinated. We won't even allow you to get out of the car. In fact, that's what happened in this case. She told the person to keep the dog in the car, and we weren't able to train the dog because obviously the dog's too young. But if you do take your dog to dog parks, and if you do take your dog to areas where they have rescues going on, just be very aware that there is distemper going around. Not very many cases, but distemper is a very serious issue, and in most cases it's fatal, something like 95% or whatever the case is. So don't take any chances with that. Likewise, people that have puppies, if there's a female that's just had a litter of puppies, those dogs are also very high risk for parvo, so stay away from those ones as well.
So I know we talked last week about some of maybe there's a week before, about the heat and making sure that dogs are being safe in the summer. One question that did also come up today as well is how quickly could a dog's feet be burned? Like, for instance, if we have a dog walking from one side of the kennels into daycare where there's maybe, 100 feet of gravel or of concrete, is that enough room for a dog's feet to be burned?
Probably not, and also that new paving that we put in, we specifically chose paving that doesn't heat up that much, so it's the cool paving, what they call cool, stays cooler. The good rule of thumb for the heat is if you can put your palm down on the ground and keep it down there. So obviously if you're walking a dog, as we do, where we have to walk him from one building to the next, is maybe 50 or 60 feet that they've got to walk. It's not that big of a deal, but we do watch that, and if you can see, you'll notice if your dog is kind of acting differently or whatever,
stepping
then obviously
lightly or
and if it's a problem, then we just wet down the areas, and we have sprayers and so forth outside anyway for the heat, so we can use that. But
one good question from Michael is, how do you guys teach your training methods, and how do you ensure consistency between trainers? Which is a really, really good question.
Great
and
question.
When you have 25 people now on staff, it can be really essential to make sure that training procedures stay consistent between everyone. Now, there's a couple things that we do. We want to make sure that we aren't making many replicas of him or of a particular trainer, because we want everyone to have their own style of training, because there's going to be different dogs that require a different style of training. The same dog that's going to be very high drive, high energy, maybe a little bit of a brat, would work well for him. Likewise, a very small, maybe Chihuahua that's very shy and insecure probably wouldn't work as well for him. So that's why we have a bunch of different styles of people and a bunch of different styles of training. That said, we do a lot of work in terms of line work in a group setting. We also have little kind of like mentor one-on-one sessions between the senior staff and maybe some of the newer staff or newer trainers as well. We actually have something I've been working on more recently, a full video series of all the behaviors that we might see at the school, some of the kind of training methods of content. Not only have we produced, that's one of the reasons why we do this podcast, is so that not only do our clients have a little bit of an aspect, and maybe people that might not know the first thing about us have a little bit of an aspect on how we work, but also our trainers know how we would like things to be done, or how we would answer questions, or how we would address a specific behavior. So both content online that we've produced, as well as some content that other trainers have produced that align with our training methods. And we also have a full Audible library for all of our staff that addresses everything from even other methods that we maybe don't align with altogether. We still want to have the knowledge on that and the expertise, because when someone comes to us, they come to us because we are an expert. It's kind of like if you were going to your doctor and you said, well, I found this thing on Google, what's your thoughts? They should at least be able to help you understand why that may be correct or why that may not be correct, and why in your situation what is happening and what to do about it. So we do a lot of training both on the methods that we might not implement, as well as the methods that we should implement, and that's a lot in our Audible library. I think right now we have about 30 books in there, also covering self-development stuff, things like how to better communicate and effectively articulate, how to work better as a team, how to basically articulate thoughts and so forth in a public environment, which through group classes is really important. So the training of staff is really what sets us, I think, apart as a school, and that's something that we're trying to always improve, because there's always things that we can do to get better. I think probably after we finish a lot of the I'd say what's not maintenance, but improvements of the actual school itself. We want to do a lot more in terms of bringing in outside, trainers, outside mentors, because again, not every single person has the same experiences in their life, and so everyone can add value in their own different ways because they all have different dogs that they've worked with, different things that might work for them, and tricks and tips along the ways that would be really beneficial for everyone.
And, a couple of things I want to add on to that. First is we have tons of supervision, so no trainers ever working alone with the dog. There's at least, even on down days, meaning days that the office is closed or whatever, we have 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever number of trainers on staff at the same time. On normal work days, we'll have sometimes 8, 10, 12 people working at the same time on the floor. So there's tons of supervision, which also means there's tons of oversight. So if a trainer is having a problem with the dog, there's a senior instructor can step in, or our training, Kelly, our general manager, can step in. But the other news, which I probably shouldn't announce yet because it's not written in stone, but one of our head trainers from a number of years ago, a trainer that trained with me for, oh my gosh, now I got to do some math, 15 years probably, something like that. She started with me when she was a young girl and joined us, and she went on to become an instructor and went on to become my head trainer and is a phenomenal trainer. Well, then she decided to go and have a baby and those kinds of things, and so that kind of took her away from this. And but the other day I chatted with her, and she's going to come back and she's going to be helping us teach our staff. Basically, she's not going to be training dogs, not doing lessons, although I would talk her into that if I could. But she's going to be training our trainers, training the apprentice trainers, training the instructors, and that's awesome because she's got a phenomenal way of working with both people as well as with dogs. I always joked with Monica that she was better off just working with dogs because that was her thing, but that was a thing in the beginning, and then later on she became really good at handling people. So probably within the next month or so, probably a couple of weeks after we get back from Europe.
And we have some other trainers and so forth. I think probably the next season of the Oosthuisen show might include some interviews as well, which will be pretty fun. So that'll be good.
So Michael says here, he said, please tell us how we did at last weekend's big match. Michael, thanks for asking. I actually had a phenomenal match. My only problem is that I broke my gun, my primary gun two days before I left. So I actually shot Christopher's gun, and it's slightly different from mine, so I struggled a little bit with that. But other than that, I had a great match, and I came second in Open, which is phenomenal, and I think I won 4 out of the 11 stages. So it was a great place to shoot. Had a great time down there in California. Really nice people. I love going over to the smaller clubs because there's so much going on. They had an awesome. I didn't even tell you this. They had an opening ceremony where they had everybody there, and they had a little guard of honor that came in, and the local sheriff came and did a speech. I love that. Thought it was a great idea. It's really good to see the community getting involved in things like that. Regardless of what we're talking about, if we're talking about dogs or our sport or whatever case, it's great to see that.
So one question Terry asked here, and this is great because this is something I wanted to talk about as well anyways, is what is how old should children be to help with the training of the family pet? And then B, how do you properly introduce your dog to a baby? So both really good questions.
So Terry, what are you telling us? You're going to have a baby or something like that? Holy smokes. I'm just kidding. So let's talk about the baby one first. There's a couple of things you got to take into account. Now, this fits into this category again that I've come up with before, where I'm going to give you some suggestions, but you have to use due diligence, meaning, if you have a high-risk dog or a dog that is reactive in some way, then you need to get professional advice. This is a very generalized response I'm going to give right now.
And by professional advice, meaning actually working with a professional and the dog, not because obviously he knows what he's talking about. It's more just aspect of he doesn't maybe know your specific dog or those specific
it's got to be looked at your specific case because there are lots of exceptions. But for the most part, I have some different ideas and on how to train or how to prepare your dog for the baby. So let's break it down into little steps. The first is if you're pregnant and you haven't yet had the baby. So you will find, as anybody that's been pregnant knows, that you go through a bunch of emotional changes. You can be high-strung, you can be irritable, you can be sad, you can be upbeat, etc., etc. And those are very difficult for dogs to manage. Those like emotions they struggle with, and often dogs won't know how to deal with that. So you have to take that into account. It's no different from handling a spouse or whatever the case is. Second aspect of that is, let's talk about when the baby has either been born in the hospital or is about to be born or whatever the case is. I like to prepare the baby's room for the dogs. For the baby to come in, and using your dog. So this is how I would generally teach people to do it. You'd actually start doing some obedience with your dog in the baby's room. What that does is it teaches your dog that there's a level of respect that they have to have, and the control that you have. It also reduces them thinking that's their territory or their space or whatever. So when the baby comes in, you don't have that mismatch going on or that conflict going on. The other aspect of doing some training in that room is that you create a positive environment for the dog. So one of the things that people often will do is when they have a baby, they'll keep the dog out of that area, or they'll lock the dog out, or they'll put a baby gate up, stop the dog. Well, sometimes that introduces a negative association for the dog with the baby. If you have a dog that's a high-risk dog, and for that reason you don't want to let the dog into that room, that's a whole nother discussion, and that's something we should basically be discussing one-on-one, not trying to deal with here. When the baby comes home, a couple of things. First of all, I like to bring the baby's blanket from the hospital. Those first couple of days when the baby's still in hospital, bring that blanket home, put it in the baby's room, let the dog sniff it, let the dog get accustomed or acclimated, if you want to call it that, to the dog, to the baby's blanket, I should say, and get used to that smell. Once that's done and you bring the baby home, just kind of keep it mellow. Don't make a big fuss out of it. Babies tend to cry, so when your baby's crying, you need to pay attention to your dog, because sometimes that crying will trigger a kind of a victim's-like response in the dog, right? Sometimes it stresses dogs out. It really depends on your particular dog. You'll find that sometimes the dogs will behave absolutely fine, and you'll find that sometimes the dogs will get all antsy and kind of like they'll slobber a little bit, or they'll kind of like run back and forth, and they'll be really anxious and show a lot of it. Those are the dogs we need to be much more careful of. So that's just some basic foundation or some basic back rules to how to handle a baby in the home and so forth. But again, I really want to emphasize, this is not an area you want to screw around with. If you're in any doubt about this, you need to get somebody that can actually introduce themselves to your dog, look at your dog, look at the way your dog's behaving, and deal with it accordingly. And unfortunately, there are times when certain dogs cannot be around a baby. You may have to look into placing a dog in a family member's home or a friend's home, for that first period, 6, 8 months, year, whatever of the baby, obviously being in the house.
Her second part to the question was, how do you, or what age should children be kind of added into the training process with their dog?
So that really depends on the child. I would say for the most part, 8 to 10 years of age is probably a good time to start your kids. When I started training as a kid, I was into it much younger than that. My parents didn't really have any idea what they were doing, so I figured stuff out on my own. But probably I was more the exception to the rule. Now, that's not to say you can't have your kids involved in the dog's training. I love the idea of kids actually helping feed the dog, helping take the bowls out, but you have to take care in what you're doing. You cannot just say to your child, here, go feed the dog. You also have to take into account the personality of your dog. If you have a dog that is defensive or highly reactive or territorial or has food resource guarding issues, any of those kinds of things, then obviously having a child involved in the dog's training is far more riskier and needs maybe some professional advice for somebody to come in and take a look at the actual case. You'll find that a really good rule of thumb is a child of like 8 to 10 years of age, they'll focus for about 8 to 10 minutes and then that's done. So for the most part with kids, I love involving the kids in training, make it fun for them, maybe make up your dog's food, in their bowl and so forth, and then go out with the child, let the child put the food down, monitor your dog. Obviously, if you have a dog, again, like at resource guards, this is not something you want to practice with them, but most dogs are not like that. Did we cover all of that?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
One last question, and we're pretty much done for tonight, is it okay to do reinforcement obedience training, or I'm guessing just obedience training in general, with 2 dogs at the same time?
Sure, absolutely. I've often trained, in fact, I'll sometimes train 2 or 3 or 4 dogs at the same time.
And you can even not only just heel work, but you can have a dog in place or in a down stay, work one dog, or even like right now, I think in some cases we have sometimes 4 or 5 dogs on the training floor in a place or in a down stay while we're working one of the other dogs, and then we rotate through them so that they learn that impulse control control, and they learn how to maintain and hold that foundational training.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, something else to consider if you are training more than one dog is make sure that you have a solid foundation on each of the dogs before you try and train them together, for obvious reasons, right? But going to your thing of training multiple dogs at the same time, you know, when we do dock diving, I'll sometimes put my one dog in a downstay and I'll jump the other dog and then bring that dog back, put him in a downstay, and then take the first dog and jump him.
And then like we back tie potentially. So obviously you have to be careful. Yeah, back chain dogs. So you have to be careful, of course, of their energy levels and their drive levels, because obviously if they're you know, back chained to a wall or to a fence or whatever it may be, and they pull very hard and yank, you know, themselves, it could obviously hurt their neck or their body. So you do want to make sure that they have the control that you expect, but at the same time a back chain helps really reinforce that kind of command or reinforce that down. Also using like an elevated place, such as we use Kuranda dog beds. That way it's a little bit more of a step for a dog to actually get off of that place rather than just simply laying down on the ground and standing up. They actually have to come down off of the elevated surface. So something like that, or even a piece of carpet, you know, towel, bath mat, whatever it may be, if you are practicing, or if you're doing heel work with two dogs. Now would that would probably be a case where you could do left side and right side?
No, I prefer that you train both of them to walk on the one side at the same time. So you'll have generally the more dominant dog will go to the outside, but that doesn't always apply. But I definitely want them both walking on the left-hand side. Something else to consider as well, if you do agility training, you might teach a dog to walk both on the left or sometimes on the right-hand side. So they literally will switch back and forth. And the reason for that is because of directing a dog through an agility course. Sometimes it's advantageous to run the dog on the right-hand side. Couple of things just real fast. Terry, I see it's not you having the baby, so good job, I suppose I should say. Patty Monroe Fowl asked, I saw you answered that. It's actually a really good question. She asked the question, should you board your two dogs together if you're boarding your dogs? Now, you know what's interesting about that? There's actually a law in Arizona that says that you cannot co-mingle dogs in the same kennel from two different families. So obviously if it's both your dogs, then you can put them in the same kennel. Two different households, we may not do that. Here's the funny thing. When I was growing up, I worked at a kennel in South Africa called Cleve Kennels, and our capacity at kennels was between 400 and 450 dogs, right? And let me tell you, you have no idea how many dogs it is until you have to handle 450 dogs, feeding and looking after them, etc., etc. In those kennels, we used to put one male and up to 3 females from different families in the same kennel, and it worked absolutely great. The dogs got along really well. It was great for dogs that used to stress out, you know, that needed that companionship with the other dog. And to be honest, I can't remember a single problem. Obviously you don't put 2 males in the same kennel, and there are some dogs that you couldn't put in with the others, but we knew which ones they were, and that worked great.
Yes, I know for us the reason why A is so that we can monitor their feeding and their water levels a little bit better. B, if a particular dog, you know, it's not like obviously the most amount of room and space that they would have at their home, so sometimes dogs get a little grouchy and so forth with each other, especially when they're in like a high energy environment, like at the school. So we obviously don't want any issues going down. So when we prefer to board dogs separately. Now we obviously we match all of the lodging numbers together, so we try to keep the same dogs from the same family at least closer to each other or right next to each other, but we prefer not to have them in the same kennel so that we can monitor them a little bit better and maintain that safety that we really want. That being said, I did reply back to Patty there, and I said if it's something that we are considering over the holiday weekend, because of course we definitely don't want to turn people away and so forth, but at the same time we obviously want to make sure that every dog is leaving here just as healthy as they come in.
Couple of questions. Linda Lagies wrote, what happened last week? We were on last week, but for some reason my Facebook would not do a party, that share party or whatever that thing's called.
For Linda though, you can go to either partnersdogs.com under resources. The Oosthuisen show is there. Obviously you can find us on Facebook, on YouTube, Spotify,
yep.
Apple
and
Podcasts.
Spotify, just enter Oosthuisen show, and trust me, we're the only Oosthuisens that do that.
Yeah.
And so that'll come up. Melanie wrote a quick question. question here. How do we get a puppy to learn to walk in heel with my other dog? She tries to play on the walk together but walks fine on a leash solo. So basically, Melanie, you're talking about distraction training. It's the same thing we talked about earlier in the conversation. What we're looking for is just a little pressure on the one dog that's jumping up and down. Maybe work that dog's energy off a little bit. Do some heel work before you bring the second dog in, and get your dog working for you, and then gradually bring the other dog in. It's a common problem that you're having, and you just got to keep working through it. It's you're balancing. You could almost say it's exponential, meaning 2 dogs but 4 times the problem. But it definitely is an issue that you can address.
Yeah.
And then Keith Barton said, "Oh, I finally got notified." Okay, that's great. Casey Truitt. Oh, Casey. Hey, Casey. How are you?
Random dog aggression. So that's actually really interesting. So I was having a conversation with someone about this today, and just for context, Casey says, how do you fix random dog aggression? So typically, there's really no necessarily such thing as random dog aggression. There's usually signs that lead up to it. It's just a matter of A, can you read those signs, and B, are you able to address those signs well enough? But I'm sure you can.
Casey, do you mean it's your dog? Just answer me on the chat here. Is it your dog showing aggression towards other dogs? And I assume that's what you mean. So basically, anytime we're dealing with aggression, what we're looking for is a higher level of control. You're allowing your dog to do the thinking instead of you doing the thinking and your dog doing the doing. So what we want is we want to increase the amount of control we put on the dogs, tighter management, heel work, sits, heel work, sits. Don't use a whole lot of force in the beginning. Try and start it off slowly, gradually build it up. If you use a lot of yelling and screaming and stuff like that, that's not a good thing, because that'll actually increase the dog's anxiety or reactivity levels. So you want to keep it nice and calm. Do your foundation training first, get your basic obedience under control, and then gradually start introducing the dog to other areas or to other dogs or whatever, starting with fairly large distance. So kind of walking down the street, make sure the other dog's on the other side of the street, control your dog's behavior, little tiny check on the dog, tell them, hey, cut it out, that type of thing. Remember, it's tone of voice more than it is.
Yep. She followed up with, yes, it's my female. She randomly jumps on the male dog.
Right. So again, if you're talking about aggression, meaning your female's jumping on the male with the intent to bite, it's exactly the same answer. And if you wonder, by the way, a lot of these answers are the same answers, right? So we want to increase our foundation. If your female is picking on the male, that's because she thinks she's more in charge, and the male's an easy target, right? That's the same victim thing we talk about. Might be territorial, could be a food thing as well, resource types, guarding issues. But again, you want your female to work for you, not for herself, because right now she's doing it for herself. Anytime that we're working with one dog and that dog is doing its own thing, that means your control level is not high enough. And it doesn't just apply to dog training, it can apply to anything. Parenting, driving down the street. If you're going too fast, that's because your self-control is not there. As we get older, we hopefully get better at these things, and that's because we learn through repetition that that's not the way to approach it. So hope that helps you out, Casey, and hope you're well. All right, I think we've covered. I hope I've got through all the questions here. Well, we're getting some great questions. I really appreciate it, guys.
Yep, so we will see you guys next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, because I realize we're not on Mountain Standard Time anymore. So 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Arizona time, for the last episode of Season 1, Episode 18. And I'm not sure what we're going to discuss yet, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, we'll post it the day before.
Yep. So thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Have a great evening.
Cheers.